Good evening. Nice to know we all take fire alarms seriously. So for those who don't know me, my name is Ben and I'm the vicar here at this church. I don't normally like to associate with being a vicar, partly because whenever I tell people, they rightly assume that anything I might say is completely irrelevant to their life. But mostly, I don't admit to being a vicar because anyone who doesn't know me says, well, you look far too young to be a vicar, although that is becoming increasingly less common. But people who bother to have any kind of meaningful conversation with me quite quickly come to the conclusion that I show none of the competence required for what they must assume is a role that requires some level of maturity. Now, I have many, many examples of this over the illustrious career of being a vicar, but when I first arrived here, part of my role is to recruit other poor suckers who might also want to do this job. And the first person I thought might be a suitable candidate happened to have never stepped foot in a Church of England church. In fact, the church that he went to met in an assembly hall in a school. And so as far as the Church of England were concerned, he must have been part of a cult. And as I got to know him, it was pretty certain he was part of a cult. Anyway, I put the guy forward and the Church of England decided he had to step through a number of hoops, religious hoops, in order to be deemed a suitable candidate to go forward, one of which was confirmation, which I didn't really know about. But we had to go to the church just down the road to get him confirmed. And not having kind of any kind of grid for this sort of thing, I arrived just in time for the service and the place is packed and the first hymn has struck up and I spot my friend on the front row and I go and join him and I stand next to him. I say, hi, how you doing? He looks at me with a slightly startled look on his face and I look down the row and the whole rest of the row is full of what I can only assume is 11-year-olds looking much smaller than either of us in our 30s. And as I look down the aisle, I noticed some of my colleagues, also vicars in the area, I just arrived, started getting to know them. They're all wearing dresses and scarves and some of them hats. And I start to get that sinking feeling that perhaps I've misjudged the occasion slightly, missed an email, something like that. So as here they are processing down and I start getting gradually smaller and smaller in my seat, thinking that if I can get small enough, I could probably match the 11-year-olds and everybody would not assume that I was anything to do with any kind of responsible position in the church. But there I was, and as we went through the service, I was thinking I was getting away with it until, to my horror, here we go again, my horror, the rest of the vicars, one by one, started standing on the stage and presenting their 11-year-olds and vouching for their spiritual maturity, dressed in their dresses and very fine linen, until it got to my turn with my 35-year-old mate, and we both stood up there looking like jokers, and I am dressed head to toe in a full-body Adidas tracksuit. Audible gasp. The bishop hasn't spoken to me since. But here I am. I'm sure none of you have shown those kind of levels of incompetency in your work, but I think it's safe to say that from time to time we all have this sudden sense within us that perhaps we're a fraud in something that we're supposed to be good at doing. Psychologists call this an imposter syndrome, and apparently 2/3 of us suffer from this. Even Einstein said this: the exaggerated esteem, he said, in which my life work is held makes me very ill at ease. I feel compelled to think of myself as an involuntary swindler. Sounds like a genius, even when he's admitting to being a fraud. Presumably then, the remaining third of us who don't suffer from this problem either are complete imposters or we're offspring of Boris Johnson. And that's the ones we know about. And so it probably wouldn't take much to convince any parent in the room that they're an imposter, a complete fraud, totally in over your head when it comes to raising small humans into any kind of readiness for the world outside. People at work, most of us have moments in our job, don't we, where we feel totally inadequate for the job that we've been employed and paid to do, even when we are raised in families with expectations of our parents and the siblings that go before us. Perhaps the burden of expectation upon us makes us feel like an imposter in our own home. Now, I can't help you with any of that, but what I can help you with is any of these feelings when it comes to the big G-O-D. And seeing as we're all here singing carols, entertaining the idea that there might be a God, imagine this. You get home tonight and you're just about to drift off to sleep. And suddenly, a host of angels enters your bedroom and stands at the end of your bed. And the glory of God comes, and there's bright lights singing the whole shebang. And you wake up absolutely terrified. And once you've got over your terror, the lead angel, who has bigger wings and is bigger than the rest of them, says, "Behold, I bring good news, great joy for all people. God has made himself known." As close as hands and feet, as near as breathing. And you are going to be the first to experience his presence. How would that make you feel? Underdressed? Now, the thing about the Christmas story is that it's shot through with one person after another, who probably had more than a little bit of this imposter syndrome going on. Think of Mary, for example. She's a peasant teenager born in a nothing town in Galilee. She's visited by an angel, and she is told that God has found favor with her and has chosen her to bring his son into the world. Imagine the sense of inadequacy she must have felt. Imagine the sense of shame, as the foreboding shame upon her, which she would probably bring upon her family and her fiancé-to-be as they found out that she was pregnant by means other than Joseph. What about Joseph? Simple carpenter, simple town, working class, yes, part of the line of David, but definitely a peasant as well. Finds out that his fiancée is pregnant. Imagine his thoughts about his family and how they're going to disown him, whether he is going to have her stoned and divorce her. He's also visited by an angel, told that God has found favor on him, and he is going to marry Mary and bring God's son into the world. The conversations they must have had as they traveled to Joseph's hometown for the census must have been full of anxiety and fear. Why us? I imagine they also spoke about the welcome they get from the extended family, given the fact that the dates not matching up would have brought shame upon them as a couple, the family, and even the extended community, which, by the way, is why I think there was no guest room available for them in the family home of Joseph's hometown. If you were to choose the first people to meet God in flesh, none of these guys would be anywhere near the top of the list unless you were trying to make a point. Now, my girls, I've got 3 of them, 10, 8, and 6. They're at the age where they love to look at pictures and videos of when they were born. And because my phone is just rammed full of pictures, sometimes I accidentally go too far back and they see the actual birth, which traumatizes them for weeks. But when we get to the right part of it, it's very hard to tell the births apart. They all look the same as far as I'm concerned. Can't remember the dates. They all merge into one. But the real problem with any of the pictures and videos is every single person in them is exactly the same. So you've got the in-laws, you have the parents, and then you have the siblings. Every picture, all pretending to be happy and smiling, us looking exhausted, the kids looking like babies, look like nothing dissimilar between them anyway. The point is, it's very hard to find out, and the reason it's hard to work out which is because the people that come to that event time and time again are those closest and most special to us. Now, here's the thing. We don't get to choose our family. In fact, you could argue most families are incompetent. They're not very Instagrammable. They don't really know how to take pictures. In fact, those in my family will not be named, but they tend to turn the aspect ratio of the video around as they're filming the moment. And so when we look back, we have to all tilt our heads like this in order to be able to see the most special moment in their life. And it annoys me every time, and I haven't got over it yet. But the point is, they're not adequate for the role. And we don't get to choose them, but God did choose the people in his story. And the question is, why? Here's why I think he chose them. It's because 2,000 years later, he wanted us to know this. If he could make room for them as the most special people at the most intimate point, as he comes and makes himself flesh, how much more should we expect him to make room for us? You and I, with all our insecurities, all our fears, all our sense of inadequacy, brought right into the center of the most powerful story ever known. Now, I know what you're thinking. Great story, but angels won't appear by my bedside tonight. Well, here's the thing. They don't need to, because according to every historian worth his or her salt, Jesus was born 2,000 years ago. And they all agree on this: despite having never written a book, despite having never conquered any kind of kingdom, despite having never won any kind of war, this one person has had a greater effect on the change of humankind than any other person that has walked the earth. And the kingdom and the manifesto on which he built his legacy is this: good news to the poor, release for the prisoner, liberty for the oppressed, the broken, the hurting, the marginalized, the inadequate. Now, I'm sure none of you have ever had this experience, but imagine that you're at your end of year work do, all right? Alcohol's flowing, drinks are free, and it's a combination of the free drinks and the fact that you're exhausted because you've been putting on this face the entire year to pretend that you're competent at your job. And as you drink more and more, you become more and more comfortable in your own skin. And you think maybe people actually want to meet the real me. And by the end of the night, it is just you on the center of the dance floor, and all your colleagues are stood around the edges. You think it's because they're watching your moves and admiring how you dance, but it's actually because they were getting injured because of your flailing limbs. Anyway, by the end, the boss decides to call time, and he comes up to you and he ushers you out and he calls you an Uber and he stuffs you in the back of an Uber, and you go home. And on the way home in the Uber, you start to get this rising sense of nausea from within you, and you think, I have to get home fast. If I do this in the cab, then my boss is going to get a bill the next day. And you stumble out of the cab when it finally arrives outside your front door, and you fumble around for your keys. You finally manage to get into the lock, and the door swings wide, and in the door frame before you is stood Jesus. The beard, the robe, the sandals, and in the shock of it, your body convulses and you projectile vomit all over him. Down his beard, in between his toes. What do you think Jesus would do? Here's what I think Jesus would do. I think he'd take you inside, and I think he'd hold your hair back as you continue to be sick. I think he'd clean you up, and you put you into your bed and sit by your bedside whilst you fall asleep. I think when you wake up in the morning, you'll smell the unmistakable scent of a full English breakfast drifting from the kitchen. And as you walk in, Jesus is hard at work preparing everything for you. And he sits you down at a table, and he comes before you and he lays you this breakfast, and he sits down opposite you and he looks you in the eye and he asks this one question: where does it hurt? When Jesus walked the earth, they recorded the things that he said, and those that followed him around were confused because he sounded unlike any of the other religious leaders at the time. In fact, he was saying some pretty shocking things, and so they said to him, "Who have you come here for? Who is it that you are speaking of? Who are you here to speak to?" And Jesus answered by saying this. He said, "It's not the healthy that need a doctor. Instead, it's the sick." So how are we supposed to respond to this person? There's a famous word picture in the Bible at the end where it says that it's like sometimes that Jesus stands at the door of our heart and he knocks. And it says if we are to have the courage to open the door and make room for him in our lives, as he comes in, the promise is he doesn't make us feel ashamed. He doesn't make us feel inadequate, guilty. Instead, we're told he comes and he sits at a table with us and he starts a relationship with us. He eats with us. In Jewish culture, that's the beginning of a relationship. And let me tell you this from experience: it is the most life-giving relationship you can ever experience. One of joy, one of peace, one of purpose. And it's experience that's open to all of us, no matter how insecure, no matter how inadequate, no matter how much of a fraud we might feel. Let's enjoy this performance together.
Table, no, there is room.
Shall we pray for a moment? If you're comfortable, you might want to shut your eyes. And so, Jesus, we bring before you all our feelings of inadequacy and fear and shame. And we thank you for your unconditional love shown in the person of Jesus. And if there's anyone here tonight who wants to, I sense that for some of us it does feel like Jesus is knocking at that door. And just in your heart now you can open it and welcome him in. And these are the words he says to you. You are my son, you are my daughter. I love you unconditionally, and I'm proud of you. Amen. So we run this thing here called the Life Course. You may have heard about it. Some of you may have not. You're sitting on one of these flyers. Now, I'm aware that some of the stuff that I said in that talk, some of the lyrics that we have sung in the carols seem pretty far-fetched and probably slightly unbelievable. Well, this course is for anybody who wants to start to think about and discuss the bigger questions of life. And we start week 1 by just discussing some of the meanings that we might attribute to our life. Week 2, we look at whether there is any overarching meaning to life, any purpose in life beyond the usual things. And we look at other religions, we look at science, atheism, agnosticism. And by week 3, we start to discuss some of the central claims to Christianity. Now, this is a brilliant course for anybody who wouldn't consider themselves to be a Christian, but is interested in those bigger questions and interested in discussing them among other people in a non-judgmental context so as to be able to work out what you think. So everybody is welcome to this. You can take this flyer home with you and sign up online or just turn up on week 1. Hannah.